Are y'all ready to start? Let me see thumbs. Good. Thumbs. All right. Everybody awake after lunch? No? All right. This is not a technical talk, so you don't have to worry about like trying to keep up, okay? It's going to be real easy. We're going to talk a little bit about hacker history, so you don't have to sweat that. Now, I will give you a bit of a word of warning. I am a very technical person. I've been told that I have a tendency to get overexcited when I talk, and I talk incredibly fast, and I forget to not be so technical sometimes. So when I get into analogies, they're probably going to be pretty technical. I don't apologize, okay? You're all smart people, I hope, right? Allegedly. Okay, so I think this talk started because I made a mistake, and I read Wired. I've got a former coworker that we just pulled out of Conde, and he's probably going to kill me when he hears that. But I think this started when I read Wired, and there was a really terrible, in my opinion, opinion piece about the hacker ethos, about who hackers are. And basically, they argued that it is time for the hacker ethos to go away. It is time for hackers as a people to grow up and stop being petulant babies, right? To stop being, well, me, right? I took offense to that. So I think about who we are as a people and whether that person was right. And obviously, I got really mad. Nerd rage hit. Wrote a couple thousand words about it. Put it up somewhere in a blog that you'll never read. That sort of thing. The Zanga problem. But that really put me down on it moved me in the next step of figuring out who I am. And I think that I'm not unique in this. I'm not alone. This stupid thing is moving around like crazy. I'm about to throw it. I think I'm not alone. I'm not unique in this problem, which is, as a community, we try to figure out who we are and where we fit in. Ever since I started getting involved in technology and programming and in the security scene, I'm like, okay, well, I'm not like this other guy. I'm not like this person over here. I don't do what they do. I don't reverse engineer things. I'm terrible at smashing stacks, right? Like, I'm not the stereotypical hacker that you think of. When you look at, when people think of hackers, I'm not that person. But I definitely identify with this community and this culture, so how can I call myself a hacker when I don't do these things? Right? I pop boxes, but not often. Right? So who am I? How do I fit in? And so it's a huge thing. Identity, boy, that lighting did not do this any favors. How do y'all feel about lights? We turn the lights off when you go to sleep? You will? Wait, we got mixed opinions. Let's just kill the lights. I'm sorry for that one person who said no. I also got 2 slides out of order here. Are we okay? So I started thinking about identity. Clearly, I just told you I was thinking about identity. But identity matters a lot for who we are, right? Because we're not just security professionals, we're not just enthusiasts, we're not just IT professionals or programmers or whatever part of the technology spectrum you find yourself on. We're not just that person, we're also participating in a culture, obviously, because you're here, right? You walk through an airport and you see a pack of sysadmins, they're easy to spot. Really easy to spot. Matter of fact, I was just out at South by Southwest not too long ago, and I was walking into the JW Marriott, and in front of the JW Marriott, there's like this, there's an outdoor cafe table set up, right? And I walk by, and there's this dude with no hair, like a Guard Zero buzz cut going on, a beard down to his belly button, right? And he's got what shirt did he have on? I'm trying to remember. It was from some security conference. I think it was Derby, right? So DerbyCon. And so he had the derby hat too, and he was sitting next to a dude who had kind of close-cropped hair, whatever, but it was dyed like electric blue, right? And wearing combat boots and khaki shorts. And there was somebody else who was, I remember the third guy who was sitting with him. Anyways, walked by, and I just, I nudged my friend who was walking next to me. I was like, did you see those guys sitting out there? He's like, yeah. I was like, I would bet any amount of money that they're in InfoSec. Like we've got a type, right? We have a stereotype. Turns out it was Egypt, right? From this point, that guy. So we think about identity, but then I got to think about who I am as well and how I fit in. This is the question you should also be asking yourself. Who are you and how do you fit in? Now, I'm not going to give you my entire biography, but it's important to know that for the purpose of this talk, who I am and how I fit in and what I do within a community. I'm a programmer. I've been programming for a while, but I'm a terrible programmer, okay? Go to my GitHub and you will weep. It's just bad code, right? I intentionally leave a lot of really bad stuff up there just so that I can show people, hey, look, in 10 years, this is how I've progressed. And so I've gone from really bad to less bad, right? Less bad is basically really bad with unit tests. I'm a veteran. Any veterans in here? Yeah. Obligatory thank you for your service. Was anybody in the Air Force? Chair Force, that's right. Chair Force Combat Communications. It's hard to bring a chair to the desert and do work like that, but we managed to do it. In air conditioning, yes, thank you. You actually know what's up then. It's for the servers, not the people. That's what we tell everybody. Now you know. We bring Power Pro with us for that very reason. I'm a community manager. I use this term loosely because I'm also not a very good one. I only figured out that I was a community manager after somebody told me that's basically what I was doing. But what that means is I manage and lead communities. I get involved in open source and online communities and in security communities and places like this. And my aim is not to take over, but I end up usually in some sort of a leadership role because that's just kind of what I do, is that I have an ability to resolve, you resolve conflict, you figure out what the community needs, and you go meet that need, and you're serving people, right? So that's what I am. Now, do any of these things make me a hacker? Like, does being a programmer make me a hacker? Does being a community manager make me a hacker? Does being a veteran make me a hacker? Doesn't matter if I was a 3D1X2 in the Air Force or the 1 Bravo 4, whatever those people are doing now, right? So then I have to ask myself, I know what I am, but am I something else, right? In order to be a hacker, am I good enough? Am I clever enough? Am I hacker enough? Right? Am I hacker enough for the hacker club? So that's where I get into the ethos. The ethos is what defines the group or the community, or from the person up through an organization, or in our case, we're talking about hackers and the hacker community, right? And I promise I'm going to get to talking about why we need hackers more than ever. But first, let's talk about this. Who here has ever told somebody outside of our industry that you've ever introduced yourself as a hacker? Like, one person is bold enough to do that? What about information security or cybersecurity? People tend to understand that more. What's the response when you say that? Do people just go, ooh, can you fix my computer, right? You kind of cringe, ugh, please no. Or the one thing I get a lot is, please don't hack my stuff, right? Whether you're a hobbyist or whether you're a professional, as soon as somebody finds out that you're part of this world, this community, that's the response. Please don't hack my stuff, right? That's going to go up on the wall in my office. The label's gotten away from us, though. Because if we think about where hackers were in the 70s and the 80s, there was a much different connotation. It was vastly different. And I think everybody here probably has, we don't have to be walking encyclopedias of hacker history to know that. There was a massive difference. So what happened in 35, 40 years? How do we go from people who were clever with technology, who were programmers, to whatever this is, to Mr. Robot, right? How do we get there? Regardless of your opinion on Mr. Robot, how do we go from A to B, right? Yes, yes, yeah, man, you blew one of my slides coming up. Come on. I'm kidding. So the word is slippery, right? And it's changed over time. Language changes over time. That's good. That's awesome. We love that. Trying to define the ethos of the hacker is hard and it's slippery, but as a people, so are we, right? Like when you try to take any 3, 4, 5, people in information security, we kind of have a type, right? We kind of have a stereotype, but when you really get past the superficial things of what we're wearing and drinking or whatever, right? Why do we drink so much? Just thought of that. That's exactly right. Everything is tears and pain, and that's how we cope, right? But when you think about it, like how much does any 3 or 4 hackers have in common? It's really, really hard to pin down what is core and essential and fundamental to who we are. So I attempted to go the other direction. I attempted to define it by what it is not, right? Does merely, popping a shell somewhere make you a hacker? No, absolutely not, right? If you can pop an XSS on a website, you are absolutely not a hacker. You're security aware more than most people. Does not make you a hacker. Is someone who codes and programs a hacker? Well, this is actually moving towards a more blue-collar approach. Like programming is becoming a lot more mundane. It's a lot less creative than it used to be. It's still a fundamentally creative discipline, but it's not like it used to be. That's also a good thing. Is a hacker a sysadmin? No. Lots of sysadmins are, though. You want to know somebody who can jack up your network? Go talk to your local sysadmin. He knows where all the bodies are buried, right? Somebody who wears a plastic mask and gets on IRC, right? Absolutely not. Okay, so we know what it's not, but let's get down to the fundamentals. What is it, right? Because when we know who we are, this is a prerequisite for the rest of the talk. Believe it or not, we're still in the introduction. This is like a really fundamental thing to get. This is not comprehensive. It's not exhaustive. Not even authoritative. This is just me trying to get down to a couple of things. Tweet-worthy. Tweetable things. Maybe it's just something really tiny that I can grasp onto. That I can say, all right, this is kind of the fundamental thing. This is like what's really, really essential to what creates this mentality. We're not talking about the entire culture. We're just talking about the mentality that produces hackers. I'm not talking specifically about cybersecurity professionals either. I'm talking about people in every field who exhibit this mentality. We just have a lot of them in this field. It's an intense curiosity. It's the people who are not satisfied with the explanation you give them. They're going to take that, they're going to run out, and they're going to do their own digging, and they're going to dig, and they're going to dig, and they're going to dig. And these are the people who are willing to stare at a screen full of arcane symbols for hours until it makes sense, and then figure out how to turn your VMware inside out. These are people who come up with clever solutions, who subvert the systems and the processes that already exist. Sometimes they do it in impressively low-tech ways, right? $10 wrench beats multi-million-dollar supercomputer. And proclivity for mischief. And I think that last element is probably the most important in making the hacker mentality happen. Not necessarily because these people are, essentially flout the law or anything like that, but it's people who are driven so much by their curiosity that they're going to go break a rule in order to satisfy their curiosity. Right? Not going to say whether it's right or wrong, but that's what happens, right? And again, you see this in all kind of fields, but it happens most, I think, in our field. Or rather, we are mostly unique in that we have identified this and we have embraced it and we've run with it. And so we've created a whole culture around this sort of thing. So I think that's it. That's the difference, right? That's it in one statement. How excited do you get about typos? Like when you see like a seg fault, when you're running like some command line tool and you get a seg fault. This actually, perfect example of this. I can't remember what tool I was running, but I got a seg fault one day, memory address and everything, and I told one group of programmers, and they went, oh, okay. And then, this is an IRC, so like told one channel, told another channel, and in the security channel, like everybody immediately just like stopped what they were doing, like, ooh, we have a seg fault, what are we gonna do, right? They like, okay, we can break this. Now let's figure out how to keep breaking it, and let's break it predictably, and then let's exploit it. That's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. So then why do we need hackers? Well, clearly, in a professional context, we need hackers because other hackers exist. Kind of an arms race sort of thing, right? We need to be able to secure systems. We need to be able to secure information. We need to be able to make sure that the right information goes to the right people, the wrong information does not go to the wrong people, that services stay available, all those sorts of things, right? The things that we're already doing. So why now is it so important? It's because systems are getting more complex. Maybe I built this incorrectly because it implies that this is complex. It's actually not. This right here on the left is kind of your basic 3-tier architecture in a data center. I'm going to use data center networking because that's the world that I come out of. I did it at Cisco for like 3.5, 4 years or something like that. Absolutely loved it. And that was my first taste of like big boy engineering, right? This is around 2010, 2011 or so. And so it's kind of a simple architecture where you have a core, you go down to a distribution layer, so this is like your 6509s, and maybe these are your 5500 series, and then these are maybe a smaller brand of your 5500, your 3750 or something like that. Top of rack switch, your intermediate, your core, right? That's a very basic data center architecture. And for a long time, especially when I came in, that was all the rage. That was what dominated data centers. Then virtualization started to change how we organize things. It allowed us to collapse. So virtualization existed in 2010, 2011, but it wasn't dominant. But around that time, we started doing the P2V shuffle, right? Everybody's VMware's getting really big. Everybody's starting to convert everything to virtual machines. Now you've got all these virtual networks floating around. In a lot of ways, you can collapse your data center architecture down, so where you can do a core straight to your top of rack switches or things like that, or you can start doing like the Cisco spine and leaf design, which is absolutely amazing, especially when you're using technologies like VXLAN, and I just did it. All right, let me wind back a little bit. I'm getting really excited talking about networking here. So over here, now what you're looking at on the right is quite literally just the inside of a single machine of VMware host and all the networking that happens there. And so now you've got the complexity of this system, and it used to be, if you needed a new service, you just slapped a new physical box in there, and that new box was your new service, and you waited like 12 weeks to do it because the sysadmin was lazy. He wasn't lazy. What he was doing was making sure that he had enough time to test his machines. That's what we always tell ourselves. So now with virtual machines, you can create and destroy machines, fast, like on demand. But then the networking becomes significantly more complex for that. You layer this virtual networking on top of this physical networking setup, and now you're taking complexity and multiplying it by complexity. Around 2013, 2014, at Cisco. Spine and leaf had existed previously, but we started doing a lot more with it because this new thing called SDN, open flow, was happening. And open flow was really, really cool, but it was even cooler when you did like this spine and leaf, which was effectively like a mesh across your distribution layer. Like everything connected to everything else, and it was cool. Who here is familiar with SDN, by the way? Like, okay, good. Uh, it died fast, sadly. Maybe ahead of its time. We're actually using a lot of SDN right now, but it's just not called that. SDN was this way of doing virtual routing on top of the physical routing and doing virtual layer 1 infrastructure on top of the physical layer 1 infrastructure. So you had this virtual data plane that existed, completely abstracted from the physical data plane. Can you imagine networking in that environment? It was fun. It was incredibly fun, right? It also introduced a lot of new problems. So then virtualization radically changed networks. You have virtual networks, virtual machines, and then that interaction, layering that on top of your already more complex networks. And so, blade servers started to become a thing about this time. They already existed, but man, once VMware really got that market penetration, all of a sudden blade servers were like, and all of a sudden, now your compute hardware is getting abstracted. So not just your network getting abstracted, not just your virtual machines getting abstracted, but the actual burned in physical hardware itself, the stuff that never should change or move around or anything like that, like UUIDs and HBAs and MAC addresses and things like that. These are now virtualized and floating around. It's awesome. It's really fun. Containers did it to us again, right? So now you see the very rapid exponential increase in complexity. And this is just in the data center compute space. This is a very narrow vertical that I'm talking about. And this is my favorite. This is where I live today. I live in Kubernetes land. And I was trying to build something very, very, very simple, right? All I wanted was to start a server, and that server was going to start a load balancer, and that load balancer was going to forward traffic from the outside to the inside. Not that hard, right? When the networking breaks, where do you go to figure out where the problem is? Because even as recently as going in this really complex data center networking where you've got virtual things on top of virtual things on top of virtual things, I can trace a frame all the way from the server it originates through the FEX, through the fabric interconnects, up to the 5K, back down, and so forth, all the way through the network, even though it was massively complex. Now networking is opaque because a lot of it is virtualized and abstracted away. So if you're a Kubernetes core developer, you understand this. You understand what's happening inside of Kubernetes. If you're, Joe DevOps trying to write a Helm chart to, that includes an ingress controller, guess what? You have no idea what's happening. It's magic and then more magic. Again, not entirely bad things, just a description of the way things are going. But this trend holds true for every technology. If you think about, again, talking about networking because that's the world I come from, how we manage traffic inspection and how we managed handling telling people they couldn't get in when they knocked on the door, right? At first it was a stateless ACL, right? Are you trying to hit port 22? No thanks, right? And then it became like stateful inspection, where, all right, well, we're gonna, let's not go there. I'll spend all day. So you would go from something like a stateless ACL to stateful inspection, and then you add a little bit of deep packet inspection and a couple other nifty features, and then you slap a branding label on it or marketing label on it, and it's a next-gen firewall, right? But the complexity went exponential increase again. Each of these systems becomes so complex because, in a way, they're insulated. They're abstracted out from each other. This is what we want, and this is why we design things the way we do, so that things can operate within their own self-contained view of the world. The problem, though, is that they all have their own self-contained view of the world, and they're getting more complex. How many of you ever played Um, what's a good example? I don't like Minecraft. Minecraft is boring. Some sort of an open world sandbox game, right? We're all thinking about Minecraft, but we're just not going to say it. That's a great one. Thank you. That's a much better one. All right. So how many NPCs and vehicles and actions are rendered in your area in Grand Theft Auto at a given time? A lot. I don't know the number, but the answer is a lot. Right? Have you ever? What sort of interactions have you seen that were unscripted? Can you think of a time when that's happened? Like, say, I don't know, somebody in a car runs over an NPC and all of a sudden the police freak out and chase that other NPC down. So now you have one non-player character chasing another non-player character for an interaction with a third non-player character. You ever seen that happen? I was playing like Terraria or something one time, and I managed to trick a hostile NPC into coming into town with a lot of other NPCs who were also hostile to that one. Well, then we got into a three-way fight because for some reason I got blamed for bringing everybody into town, and then like it's fun when you do things like that, right? But what happens is you've got complex systems because this NPC has this set of rules and this view of the world, and then this NPC has this set of rules and this view of the world where, you know, if a crime is committed either by a player character or a non-player character, they have to respond in a certain way, right? What that's called is emergent behavior. When you get complex systems interacting, or you just have one massive complex system with a lot of subsystems, behavior emerges that was not programmed, that was not scripted, that was not intended. Maybe it's welcomed, but it was not intentionally designed. It's emergent. It happened kind of on its own. Distributed systems are particularly bad at this. So if you ever use anything like console or distributed databases or stuff like that, these are just like, they're like a nightmare as far as fun quirks that you discover. Charity Majors was talking about this recently. She was speaking specifically about distributed systems and trying to monitor them and alert on these things. And she said that that things aren't going to fail in the same way. So what she's talking about is you won't be woken up in the middle of the night for a pager for a server going down, because it's a distributed system and nobody gives a crap about a single server, right? It's a distributed system. Server goes down, fails over to somewhere else, the other server comes back up. Who cares? It's ephemeral, right? What'll happen is you start monitoring on different things. You start looking for metrics and heuristics and different metrics and things like that. So it'll fail in new and exciting ways, and who doesn't love new and exciting and unpredictable failures, right? The point being is that we cannot try to solve new problems in old ways. I guess this makes this introduction part 2. That is why we need the hacker mentality. That is why we need people who are curious enough and creative enough to think of these new and exciting failures. We need people who are not going to say, oh, we're just going to solve this same distributed, or we're going to try to apply the same principles that we were using in vulnerability management from 25 years ago, where you had static infrastructure, where you had servers that lived for ages and ages. I actually decommissioned a server one time that was up for 11 years. That was awesome. It was running Red Hat 5.5 when I killed it. Extended support. You know, you get this static infrastructure, and we're going to apply vulnerability management in the same way that we always have been, where we have now ephemeral environments and dynamic infrastructure and containers and things like that. How do your vulnerability management tools stack up to an environment like that? Short answer is that they don't. And yet we're still trying to solve the new problems in the same old ways. And that's why we need the hacker mentality. Furthermore, this is where more than ever comes in. It's a big number. Enough zeros? Anyways, 2 million. ISACA predicts that there will be a global shortfall of security professionals, 2 million people, by 2019. By comparison, does anybody know what the population of Metro Orlando is? No. I was shocked by this. Far lower. It's about 275. I thought it was bigger. It's like something like 7 times the population of Orlando that we're going to have a global shortage of security professionals. Isn't that crazy? No, that's global, right? 2 million people across the globe is relatively a drop in the bucket. But what we have is a combination of things that renders the hacker mentality very, very critical at this point in time. We have a massive skills shortage and increasingly complex systems that create emergent behavior. So remember earlier when I said that hacking is becoming, not hacking, programming is becoming more of a rote exercise. We're taking a blue collar approach to it, and that's okay. You can, there's templates out there for everything. There's a pattern out there for everything, and you don't have to be massively creative to do a lot of programming anymore. But for the creative things, we absolutely want the people who have the creative mentality. And the same goes for hacking. How many of you, if you're a penetration tester in here, I'm not trying to call you out, but how many of you in here have ever had a penetration test done or have done an engagement yourself where it was completely how many of you have ever done an assessment or had an assessment done where it was very, very obvious that the person who was working did not have to apply any sort of thought or effort whatsoever? And it wasn't because your infrastructure was like Swiss cheese and there were holes everywhere. It was just because it's a routine, right? Fire up this tool, do this thing. Fire up this tool, do this thing. Fire up this tool, do this thing. Collect all your results, analyze them, produce your report, done. 48 hours, collect your few $1,000s, whatever, right? You can do this by rote, but how do you creatively assess a web application or infrastructure or things like that? So that's the difference that I was talking about between your person who just pops shells and your hacker. What separates them? What makes the difference? Is it the creativity? Is it the curiosity? Is it the penchant for mischief? You really don't want your penetration testers going out of scope, right? So maybe the penchant for mischief really will get people in trouble, right? But what it means is that the skill is not just useful, it's essential. We have, well, okay, let's do this. How many people here are 30 or over? Significant amount. I like that. Okay, so for you old timers. Millennials and above. For those of us who can remember, in 1995-ish, how many email addresses did you see in a commercial on TV? Or how many websites did you see in commercials on TV? 0. The first time I remember seeing one, I think, was in 2000 or 2001, I think. Like a really, really far forward company or something like that. I mean, it was rare to see a web address on a commercial at that time. Fast forward like a few more years, like 5, 8 more years, right? Where do you see web addresses? Quite literally like everywhere, right? And you think about, it's easy to throw social media under the bus. We're not throwing it under the bus, but we are going to talk about it. Let's think about the way we interact as people, as members of society in the early to mid 90s. If you needed to arrange plans with somebody, how did you do it? You call them on what? A phone that was plugged into wires and a landline, right? 48 volts, direct current in your hand, boop, 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 DTMF, right? So you actually picked up a phone that could only dial numbers. It's amazing. Well, it could only dial numbers unless you were somebody else. Yeah. But that's how you did it, right? So you pretty much had to be at a place with a known phone number, and you had to call somebody else who was supposed to be at a place with a known phone number, right? And so if I wanted to get you and you were out of the house, what happened? Oh, I'm just out of luck. And then you fast forward a few more years, just a few years, right? And a couple people have cell phones. Like cell phones have been around for a while, but they're like prohibitively expensive. Now fast forward a few years, you've got, more people with cell phones. Now, who here does not have a cell phone? Literally nobody. I found the people who were on call. Who has a beeper or a pager in here? Right? All right, so of the population in this room who have cell phones, which is everybody, how many of you do not have a smartphone? So again, 100%. I may be talking to a biased audience here. I don't know. But the penetration in the American market for smartphones is ridiculously high. Did you know? Quite literally today, I actually learned this last night, hanging out with some other technologist friends. I actually learned last night that there are more people have access to or own a smartphone than have toothbrushes. Isn't that amazing? More people, and yeah, we're not talking about sysadmins here. I guess they have one. I'm just not familiar with it. God, it's so easy to pick on sysadmins. I can say this because I basically am one. Isn't that wild, though, that more people have access to cell phones, like not just cell phones, but smartphones with internet capability, than have access to toothbrushes? It just blows my mind. So when you have a culture, by the way, if you need to make plans with somebody today, how do you do it? Text message. Use one of like 25 different messaging platforms that you've got, right? Please don't. If you need to get a hold of somebody today, it is dramatically changed, right? And like our entire way of operating is dependent on this instant availability of people because they're so tied in to their phone. Same goes for email and things like that, right? And it's even got to the point where there's some messaging apps that functionally replace email for me, like Slack. If somebody emails me and is also part of my company, I get very upset. There's absolutely no reason you should be emailing me, right? I just don't. We have Slack for that. Stop. I guess there's there are exceptions, but for the most part, I've got people that are like email happy that think I'm actually going to read what's in my inbox within like any reasonable amount of time. So they get mad. They'll send me an email, and like 20 minutes later, they'll call me or Slack me when I haven't responded. Like, why didn't you respond to my email? Because it's email. We have replaced that. I'm going on a rant here. So the entire way we operate as a culture and as a society has changed to fit our dependence on technology. And as I demonstrated earlier, every single one of these verticals is massively complex, and the complexity is increasing exponentially. Now, how many here are professionals in technology in some way? Doesn't matter if you're in security, like, okay, good chunk of the room, right? So, how many here are hobbyists or amateurs, not professionals, but you're down with this tech thing, right? You do some programming, you do some security, you do some CTFs, whatever. Maybe you're a college student. Yeah, absolutely. I'm both, right? We hold this sacred, arcane knowledge. I want you to understand that, okay? Call yourself a wizard, call yourself a priest, call yourself a shaman, whatever you want to call yourself, I need you to understand this, okay? We are the priests of a new technocracy. In many ways, our culture worships engineering and technology. And we are the ones who hold far more knowledge about these systems than anybody else. And so by default, we are the ones, we're effectively the priests, we're the clergy, we're the ones who hold the sacred knowledge, and we dispense what people get. Does that communicate a heavy responsibility to anybody else? Should be massive, right? So what happens? What's our responsibility here? We have to shepherd our flocks, right? If we think of this analogy as a priest. So what we need, we are the priests by default, if we're using this analogy. If anybody's offended by it, come yell at me later. But we have these flocks to tend to. The immediate people in our influence, whether that's our, first and foremost, more likely our family, right? Because we are the family nerd. We're the one that every Thanksgiving we go home and everybody throws their computer at us, and while everybody else is eating cranberry sauce and turkey, we are fixing laptops. Okay? We have to shepherd our flocks. We have to teach people what it means to operate in this new environment. But if you understand the analogy of us being priests or shamans, or hopefully if we're doing this right, we are Sherpas, and we are bringing people along, and we are helping. We're raising up new people, okay? Think about that skills shortfall, the gap in people. 2 million people next year. It's not like we have enough people now, and then January 1st, 2019, there's all of a sudden 2 million people that are missing. It's not like that. They're already gone. We already don't have people. We're already at a massive skills shortage. I hate phones that do that. Like you're talking and all of a sudden Google thinks that it's time to start chipping in the conversation. How many times has that happened to you? Yeah. We also need to understand what is essential to hackers. What is essential to the hacker mentality? Because it's going to change, it's going to evolve, it's going to grow up. We are absolutely necessary, and we have to have more people doing what we do. Simply having the same amount of people to tackle more complex systems, and as the number of systems increase, is not going to cut it. Let's assume for a moment it will never happen. Let's assume for a moment that every person in the world is just nice. Nobody wants to steal your credit card information. Nobody wants to fish you into giving $10,000 to some guy in Nigeria, right? Let's assume for a minute that there are no bad guys. We still need hackers. We still need people who are all about that information security thing, because our job is not just to keep hackers out. What else? We're concerned with availability of information. We are concerned with the consistency of information, right? We have to make sure that when people go to do things, that the thing is there or not there, right? We have to make sure that the data that they put in is the same data that they get out, and that they can trust that, and that it's reliable. If you use MongoDB, you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? Oh, your rights? Yeah, I never saw that. So, to answer the question from earlier, the ethos is not dead. It's evolving. It's growing. It's changing, right? In my speaker bag, I got a DVD, a copy of the 20th anniversary copy of Hackers, right? Who's seen that movie? How different is our culture today than it was 20 years ago, right? And you can look at Hackers a lot of ways like it's kind of a parody of us in a lot of ways, but think about from 20 years ago or from 30 years ago, right? What did we look like in the 90s? What did we look like in the 80s? What do we look like today? The ethos isn't dead. It's changing, it's growing, it's evolving. And we are evolving with it. So we have to think about what is essential and fundamental to the hacker ethos. And we have to apply that. Because technology is going to keep moving forward whether or not we are there. Systems are going to keep getting more complex. There will be new Node.js modules published to NPM whether or not we want them to. Okay? It's going to keep going forward. So a closing word. Your clothes and your stickers do not make you a hacker. Long hair and a beard do not make you a hacker. Using Metasploit does not make you a hacker. I attempted, in some small way, to try to help define what the hacker ethos is today by taking from what it is not. It's not, like I said, it's not authoritative. I'm just one guy. But I want you to think about what it is, whether or not you're part of the family. If you're here, you probably are. Whether or not you're part of the family, whether or not you think that way, whether or not you have that mentality, whether or not you operate that way. And think about what is essential. What do you have in common with me? And what do you have in common with her? And what do you have in common with him? That's the essence of that. When you get down to the lowest common denominator, that's what makes us hackers. And we absolutely are more necessary now than ever before. Thank you. I think we have about 5 minutes for Q&A. If you have any questions, I am here. If you don't, all right, fine, bye. So are you talking about your Rapid Sevens of the world, or are you talking about your hacking teams of the world? Yeah, so does he. So I think it's a good thing that they exist. I think it's absolutely great that they are around, that they're publishing tools that are helping security professionals, that are helping enthusiasts and hobbyists learn the trade. It is a double-edged sword. I mean, the same Metasploit that we use to assess our internal infrastructure is the one that our enemies are using to attack us, and so on for every tool, right? I don't necessarily think, well, yeah, commoditization is the right word, but I don't think in those companies it has the same negative or for those companies, I don't think it has the same negative context. In a lot of ways, I do think that the dumbing down that a lot of people decry as awful is a good thing, because what it does is it lowers the barrier to entry. Not everybody needs to be a hacker, but everybody does need to be more security aware. And so I think that providing tools in such a way that people can get a better security awareness of their infrastructure without having to be Egypt is a good thing. I look at it a lot like WordPress. You don't need to be a web developer to have a website and own it yourself and take responsibility for the stack, because WordPress does that for you. Now, because you don't understand the whole stack completely, you necessarily face a lot of problems when trying to do more complex things. And there's things that you probably do that because of lack of experience you don't understand. But I look at it that way. WordPress is a good thing, not a bad thing. Metasploit is a good thing, not a bad thing. And so that's how I feel about that. Yeah. All right, anybody else?